support. Data is shared through visuals, and that's sort of what we'll try to do as we speak. But today, I'm here also in a different capacity as a father to a Gen Z, and as a father also to a Gen Alpha, and they're here. They came with me because they closed school yesterday, and interestingly, they too have been a month or two ago, they had been invited by Mtoto News to talk about funding disruptions from the lens of children and their future. And so they are part of the conversation, but from Mtoto News. In this regard, I request that we, of course, do not, we safeguard and we do what is important when it comes to child protection. So this is an exciting conversation that we are having, and I want to begin first just by acknowledging that we are living in a time of a lot of dysfunctionality, a lot of dysynchrony, and a lot of disappointment. And when I say dysfunctionality, what do I mean? Think about the systems that we operate in. I think you've heard from what has been mentioned. The question you're asking is that the systems, even the health systems, but also the funding pipelines, the funding systems, the governance systems, are they working the way they should? We see a lot of dysfunction in the disconnect between the global funding priorities and the on-ground. And I think we're already beginning to hear how that looks like, the on-the-ground needs in the communities and in the continent, as a matter of fact. We see this in very complex, and when we are talking about ODA, when we are talking about the official development assistance, there was also a bit of opaqueness, and I guess by the time the declarations in January were being made, part of that was to be able to streamline access properly, because it has the dysfunctionality is that we don't always have the resources directly benefit partner countries, and as our data will show, it's this very clunky machinery of development finance that often feels very sputtering and not soaring. We see dysynchrony in the sense that there is a lot of things that are out of sync. There is a lot of replication. There is a lot of things that are also out of time. There is a lot of mismatch between what is urgent, what is evolving health and development challenges that we face. And right now, they are made further complex because of the climate change impacts that we are seeing, because of the persistent inequalities, and also new health crisis that is also added into the slow and very often reactive pace of funding and policy adaptation. It's sort of like trying to address the 21st century problems with 20th century tools and timelines. These needs are immediate, but often the response can feel very delayed and out of time, out of scope, and very slow. But we also see disappointment. And I'm talking about disappointment hits home for many in the sector. You've heard that people have lost jobs. Truly, colleagues that we've worked with who have led very important initiatives that are life-saving, they are no longer able to contribute to the sector. Their dashed hopes when promised funding doesn't materialize, or when impactful projects are cut short due to financial instability within the organization, but also more broadly within the sector. So there's a frustration in seeing years of progress threatened by sudden shifts in donor priority, by the global economic volatility that exists. And there's a quiet sigh when a brilliant initiative that has been formed through the processes that are necessary, it then can't take off the ground because the funding landscape is uncertain or cannot adequately fund that. So when you talk about dysfunctionality, when you talk about desynchrony and disappointment, we are seeing these are not just technical terms. They are describing the very real and sometimes painful realities that shape the health sector, the development sector, and the environment that we are working in. But, and this is crucial, as we acknowledge these challenges, for us and where I come in and what we've been doing, it becomes just the first step to begin to reframe, to reimagine, and to resolve them. And we, together, collectively, will need to look at the eye in the beast, understand its nature, and then figure out how to tame it, or better yet, how to transform it. And this is the context for Development Dynamics, the organization in which I am privileged to be the lead. We are a lean team of around 11 innovators and researchers and system architects, supported by 27 other affiliates across the African region. And our work is rooted in a commitment to African self-determination. We are an Afrocentric, proudly. We are Pan-African, and we are also working towards impact and just to disrupt the development, social impact, and philanthropy ecosystems. And we've been trying to do this and to meet the moment in three ways. And one of those is through our think tank, where as an insights hub, we've been curating and producing knowledge and intelligence, some of which we'll be sharing today. As a do tank, we've been co-creating strategy with various organizations, supporting collective capacity, and also how to measure and tell impact. And as a through tank, we've been convening, connecting, and catalyzing resources to various tunes across the sector. And what makes us unique is our triple play approach. I think when we are here in the room, we think who is affected the most. That's usually the user, the person in the community, the person who has the need. When you're talking about the health system, you're talking about the person who needs their health safeguarded. And therefore, it's important to deeply empathize with them. It's important to deeply think about the system, that the ecosystem and the interconnectedness of issues that, that make their everyday reality. And it's also important to check out what their foresights are going to be. So in the recent past, and building on this, when this year hit, in the month of January, organizations, including ourselves and most of yours, were firming up our annual plans. We were fixing budgets. We were getting ready to take off. And then, boom, a new US president is sworn in on was it 26th or 16th? And alongside his billionaire sidekick, they decide that we are going to pronounce a stop work order. And just that one sneeze in Washington, it became not just a cough, not just a flu, it became a global pandemic again. We felt like we have returned to 2020. And the number, I mean, we had been seeing what the declines had been looking like, but this was a massive one. And shortly thereafter, other European countries also began mentioning that they are going to follow suit and start giving timelines. While for the US government was immediate, the rest also started giving timelines and reductions with words like work towards self-determination. So what did we do at Development Dynamics? At that time, we conducted, in all of February and March, working with the East African Philanthropy Network, we conducted a rapid assessment on the impacts and adaptations to these funding disruptions. We collected and analyzed data from 235 organizations in East Africa who are reaching millions of people in interventions, especially in health, and then health plus. So it could be in health and education, health and livelihood, health and climate, health and agriculture, etc. And our findings, they began showing the acute pain point that many African development organizations are feeling due to these recent and very severe funding disruptions. we began examining the direct correlation between the funding cuts and the impact on the mandates of these organizations. And ladies and gentlemen, it's not just about losing money. It's about losing the ability to serve communities in their millions. We saw and highlighted some effective adaptation strategies, resilience that goes beyond just survival. And our report, which we will gladly share after this, shed light on some organizations and how they're adapting and taking strategic action in response to these funding changes. And a few of them were taking anticipatory action around strengthening what we call the 5P framework, which is private, public, philanthropy, people-powered partnerships. And speaking of partnerships, we also work next with the Wings Foundation and the African Ventures Philanthropy Alliance, AVPA, where we undertook a 3-month study, just again in this year, early in this year, between March and May, on what we call the Pan-African multi-stakeholder partnerships ecosystems in our region. And this particular study wasn't just about who we are partnering with. It was actually a key focus on exploring the strategic deployment of what we call catalytic capital. And our question is, how do we de-risk social investments, health investments, to attract the private funding that is important? That is desperately needed. It's about shifting, as we are saying, shifting the narrative from aid and from charity to very strategic investment in the different pipelines around health. So crucially, this study had us also do a deep dive and analyze power dynamics. Power dynamics is something very important, and interdependencies between various actors. We are seeing venture funds, we are seeing foundations, individual philanthropists, and the international entities. But let's be honest, the elephant in the room around power dynamics, it's who actually dictates funding flows. And more accurately, where doesn't it flow towards? That's an important question. So we need to understand that the hidden currents to truly influence change. And so most recently, and just ahead of a recent Adolescent Sexual Reproductive Health Conference in Mombasa, and also the International AIDS Summit in Kigali last month, we published this groundbreaking SRHR funding outlook for 2025 to 2026. And we specifically had been looking across the year at the SRHR funding. SRHR is sexual and reproductive health in East and Southern African beyond this year, or rather into the second half of this year and beyond. And because we need to anticipate, not just react. So we identified that major development partners and the broader development trends, the geopolitical shifts, issues like the anti-SRHR movements, these things are directly impacting funding and where it's going. And our goal in this research was to propose strategic considerations for the East African-based actors in health. And the questions that we are asking today: how do you adapt when the ground is constantly shifting from beneath your feet? This particular research also is important because it offers some navigational charts for us to consider. I'm excited to also mention that we are in the process of working on a paper that is in progress. It's a landscape of innovative financing models for sustainable development goals, and we are particularly leaning on health. And this is our proactive step towards resolving the challenges that we've identified, continuously seeking new ways to ensure that the goals amidst the global desynchrony and disappointments are not being assumed. So, question is this is one of the reports that I've spoken about. This is the other, and I will share a QR code at the end. And this is the other one that I just spoke about. So these three will form. I will consolidate shortly just a few highlights from that we have triangulated from these three. And my colleagues Nicholas and Felshia, they're here somewhere. Yes, Felcia is there and Nicholas is somewhere. All of us are available to deep dive into this a little bit more. So let's see what this data actually tells us. Now, our data is telling us that around 21% of organizations are at risk of losing 75 to 90% of their funding. This is all the research, or the combination of all of what we've spoken. Now, only 8% are saying that they can navigate properly. It's not just about reduction. There's a pretty clear existential threat. And then when we look at ODA, which is a conversation that today's roundtable is addressing a lot, we see that over 18 or close to 19 billion euros of the ODA reported in 2023 did not directly benefit partner countries, and East Africa particularly has some concerning amounts that we could be looking at. These funds counted as aid, but often cover in donor refugee costs or imputed students' costs. They obscure the true level of genuine assistance that is reaching the ground. And so what this actually means is that the resources for critical programs like health are far less headline figures, they are far less than the headline figures actually suggest. And the organizations here that in the room that are bearing the brunt of that a lot. And what's more, where there is a stagnating or declining proportion of overall ODA, specifically allocated to SRHR, it then has various other implications. We also seen that while we face these challenges, the role of crucial contributors within philanthropy, like Gates Foundation, who had contributed close to 40 million to UNFPA, NANCO last year, and Amplify Change, who had provided some vital grants for health advocacy work across Africa. This philanthropic support is crucial to ensure that we can continue getting the gains. On a more positive note, bilateral donors like Canada, who emerged last year through their various mechanisms as a proactive donor, they announced around 250 million in new projects earlier this year. And fortunately, most of those were directly targeted towards health, and especially adolescent sexual and especially sexual and reproductive health and rights. So if we sit and just try and triangulate that 21% of our organizations that face severe funding, and then a significant portion of reported aid not reaching its intended destination, how can we then collectively advocate for more, not just for more funding, but for smarter, more transparent, more impactful funding? What role can the media play in this? What role can the different partners who are in this room play to ensure that every dollar counted as aid actually genuinely drives the demand on ground? Additionally, beyond the direct financial figures, our research also has highlighted several compounding dynamics that are shaping funding, especially in 2025 and moving into next year. Already most countries whose new financial calendar starts in June of this year, in July, of this year, we're already living in the 2025-2026 era. These are the underlying currents that will dictate where the flow of resources and the viability of our development work. First is just this drop in financing across the aid system. I think we have seen what that has looked like for not just UNFPA, that's just one, but the global needs are increasing and they're soaring, and it's a critical focus that we have to see how we can tighten our resource environment. The rise of populist governments and increasing humanitarian demands that are driven by conflicts in places like Ukraine, like Sudan, these are fundamentally altering also where resources are going. Aid is now being diverted to more acute crises, often at times at the expense of health. And perhaps more alarmingly, we are seeing the intensified efforts of, in this country, perhaps anti-rights, anti-reproductive rights, anti-sexual rights movements. These are well-funded, intentionally coordinated efforts that are actively working to undermine policies and funding. And this introduces some ideological threats that go beyond just funding cuts, because it's about politicizing critical health decisions. And given these profound shifts, I think, and a shrinking aid pie, competing global crises, the direct ideological attacks, what is our collective strategy to not just thrive, rather to not just survive, but to actually thrive? And how do we ensure that collectively, including with the narratives that we tell, that essential development work, particularly in sensitive areas like health, in life areas like the ones we've been mentioning, is not sacrificed at the altar of geopolitical expediency or ideological agendas. We did a deeper, in-depth analysis across Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal that involved a lot of key extensive informant interviews, and there are things that we are seeing that are critical, 3 things that we are seeing that are critical and interconnected. These are trends that we are seeing that are defining the African philanthropic ecosystem and how we must respond to funding disruptions. And I'm calling on the media to capture this and support in raising the voice for this. We are observing a distinct and accelerating movement towards hybrid organizational models. And this means that organizations, including those who are working in health and those ones who are working alone, they are no longer solely reliant on traditional grant funding, but are actively embracing market-based mechanisms like social enterprises and earned income streams. Our data shows high prevalence of organizations engaged in multi-sector coalitions, in public-private partnerships, in NGO government collaborations, and we see that hybrid engagement is very central and very fundamental to how we adapt. What's exciting about that is also shows how African ingenuity works. The second thing that we are seeing here is sort of like a double-edged sword. Government, and we probably have a few in the room, its involvement is very critical, is a very critical fulcrum for the efficiency and sustainability of multi-stakeholder partnerships. Governments are key partners in 85% of the multi-stakeholder partnerships that we see, including in health and development. However, because of regulatory complexities, because of things like bureaucratical hurdles and political transitions, then these serve as obstacles. And while essential for systemic change, navigating this landscape requires that we cultivate some personal relationships, that we fund relationship building at times, and that we really build trust. And then there's something I mentioned earlier, which is about power dynamics. Deep-seated power imbalances, particularly between large international funders and then local African organizations. This is a pervasive challenge. It manifests as rigid, as short-term funding models, as a lack of genuine co-creation, and as differing definitions of success. Our data, while not explicitly naming power imbalances, it shows quite a lot of disproportionate roles of funder versus implementer, resource disparities, and conflicting goals within collaborations, all of which point to an underlying power asymmetries. Now, addressing this is not optional. It is not something that we can ignore. It's a prerequisite for local, authentic ownership and sustainable change. And my question to us is, if hybridity is our survival strategy, government engagement is as necessary as we believe it is, but is also a tightrope tightrope walk, and confronting power dynamics is non-negotiable for us to survive this time, but also set ourselves up as a health sector, as a development sector for success. How do we then, as the people in this room, intentionally design narratives, programs, initiatives to move beyond incremental adjustments to systemic transformations? Are we willing to challenge existing norms, including in our remote areas, and redistribute or use our power to redistribute power and to cede power where it is important to do so? So the period that we are in is seeing funding changes upside down. The traditional funding landscape is indeed turning upside down. We've witnessed, what we are witnessing are not just minor adjustments. We are witnessing fundamental shifts in how capital is being mobilized. So we are seeing impact investing rising. We are seeing community-centric fundraising becoming a big thing. Platforms finding their niche. Outcomes-based financing growing. Collaborative financing models becoming standard, and matched financing as a key thing. And I'll skip this so that I leave you with some food for thought and conversation after. But I'll say that there are big changes ahead. And these big changes, because of where we are at, they require a fundamental shift in terms of how we think. We require big budgets to move the sort of health disparities that exist. We require to look at stuff from a multiple lens. We require to take big bets and move capital. We require to address big challenges. We require to move along the big shifts and big innovations and big collaborations, and also to evolve in our language. And this is where the media plays a key role in helping to highlight some of this. And so given what we now know and what we also do not know, I think it's time for us to ask ourselves, how do we change and how do we transform? And what happens next truly depends on where you see yourself and where you are in this ecosystem. I leave you with a challenge to just look on screen and identify what you can do. Every one of us here can play a role. You may be a convener that's bringing, this kind of convening together, but also with others. And that's a critical role that needs to continue playing. There are researchers like ourselves and advocates like people who are here in the room. There's one here that I like a lot. I call it stalker. We have to keep our eyes and ears open to opportunities and take advantage of them. See where the leverage points are and enter and address them. But we also have to keep building capacity, and maybe a few of us have that mandate. And as I go to sit, I think I leave you with just that food for thought. In the kind of evolving landscape that we are finding, that funding disruptions have brought, there's also a lot of new opportunities. Which of the roles that you saw there can you play, or are you playing? Or are you already equipped to play but maybe haven't yet started playing? How will your own unique contribution ignite the kind of change that we are seeking? The QR code that's here leads you to the reports that we have, and feel free to access them. And I appreciate the conversation that is about to happen, especially grounded on data and reality. Thank you very much.